Hello, we are live coming from the Centre of Excellence in Teaching and Learning at National University of Ireland in Galway, the one-day symposium entitled Design for Learning. We have a number of people on site and a full house with our virtual participants too. At the moment we have Donna Lanclos and Su-Ming Chu who are on site, and I'll ask first everybody if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves. We'll start with our virtual participants first, please, and just a quick intro, maybe very briefly where you are, and then we'll move on to our on-site people and we'll start the conversation. So I'll ask maybe Jim, you could start off first there, please.
Okay, I'm Jim Luke. I'm known on Twitter and elsewhere as Econ Prof. I obviously teach economics I teach at Lancet Community College, but I also, about half of my job is starting and running our Open Learning Lab.
Johanna, would you like to jump in there?
Hi everyone, I'm Johanna Funk. I work currently online for Charles Darwin University in Darwin, Australia, but I'm based here in Portland, finishing off my PhD in open education practices for workforce development with Indigenous learners and learning cohorts, and implications for how we design learning for diverse students. So this is really a great session to come to. Thanks.
Okay, Ken Bauer, maybe?
Sure. Ken Bauer, originally from Canada. I'm the virtually connecting lead in Latin America because I live in Mexico and have for 20 years. Associate professor here at the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Guadalajara.
Next, Ken.
Hi, I'm Ken Brown. I'm a lecturer in engineering at Letterkenny Institute of Technology. I've been lecturing now for 20 years and in e-learning since about 2000, and I'm doing a PhD in this area as well, the sense of belonging in mathematics for engineering.
Great. Marisol?
Hi, I'm Marisol from University of Guadalajara in Mexico. I'm working in a master degree about technology.
Phil, maybe?
Hi, I'm Phil Scannell. I work as a dental nurse in the University Dental School and Hospital. I'm involved in the training and have been involved in the practical training of dental nurses for the last 25 years in clinical situations, and I'm also involved with the undergraduate BDS program in relation to their training in clinical situations as well, but in the other support systems that are involved. Thank you.
Great. And then that's you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I work as a lecturer at a small specialist arts college in a rural area in England, Hereford College of Arts. And my PhD, I'm looking at sort of the critical rural pedagogies of the arts colleges as kind of critical space within education.
Great, thank you very much. Just as Lorna's entering the room, fantastic. Welcome. Okay, we're just about to go over to our on-site people, and when you get yourself settled, if you wouldn't mind, just introducing yourselves and just kicking off the conversation. Just tell us what your highlights are so far from today.
Oh, shall I go first? Yeah. Just go on. Alistair's going to be joining us in a minute too. Awesome. Excellent. No, it's been great. It's been really good. So my name's Lorna Campbell. I'm doing the closing keynote later on this afternoon. I work at the University of Edinburgh. My expertise is not so much in physical spaces, but in online spaces, and particularly open online spaces. So it was really interesting for me this morning to hear people talking about physical spaces and the affordances of different types of physical spaces. So both Alistair and Donna gave excellent keynotes this morning. I'm particularly interested in some of the points that Donna raised about how we can build these very sort of collaborative, innovative learning spaces, but we need to give staff the right training and the right opportunities to be able to use them creatively, and just putting space in there isn't enough if staff haven't got the time and the bandwidth and the resources to develop these creative approaches to curriculum and to teaching and learning. So I found that was really interesting. And then afterwards, we had some lovely panel papers, and there was one I particularly liked from Katrina Carlin, and she was talking about the importance of biodiverse spaces, and how we need to consider the outdoors as a teaching and learning space, and not just for people who are teaching or learning about ecology, but that it's important for all of us, and just the affordances of actually having access to outdoor space, and just the ability that gives us to just sort of step back and think and take a breath. So that was lovely. That was really nice. So those are my highlights.
I was following that on Twitter, the get outside and teach thing. Were you in that session as well?
Yeah, tweeted quite a few tweets.
Yeah, I was following that along. I ran over to the session that was going to talk about University College Court spaces for sentimental reasons, because I was an undergraduate at UCC in the early 90s, and I wanted to hear them talk about their new student hub. So they also, funnily enough, went over and talked to people at UCL. So there were all these spaces that have been in my head that they were discussing here, and so it was a selfish choice on my part, but I was glad I made it, because they too were talking about, it's not just about the spaces, but then about what you do with them, what sort of people things are happening in the spaces, and then sort of the layering of digital within those spaces, and what that can do to change, enhance, transform the kinds of things you're trying to do. So.
Okay, well, I'm maybe coming at it from a little bit of a sideways angle, because my interest is in what is the space of higher education itself. And it's a sort of a vast, diverse, complex, super complex, hyper complex, contradictory, impossible, ridiculous, absurd space. So I guess that was what I was coming to. And so I took a lot really from Alistair and Donna's, both their keynotes, because they kind of pinged off for me. Alistair started by just giving a very broad view. Well, though he was mainly talking about, and you're mainly addressing, I think, the actual built spaces and how we construct spaces for doing whatever it is that we do, and how we could think about that and think about it differently, and some of the different ideas. But you put it in a very broad context. And one of the big takeaways for me, I'm really interested in higher education as an ethical space, and the different kinds of ethics that inhabit the space of higher education. So you showed lots and lots of different infographics and diagrams and statistics, just to kind of, which really got me thinking about, what these different competing ethics of higher education, and big ethical dilemmas, mainly around how we fund it, and this private, privileged, public kind of blurring. So I did tweet a couple of tweets around, well, what do we mean by being able to actively manage what that blurry space is? And so what I really liked in that was, in Alice's talk, was sparking off this question. And in fact, it was this very complex, huge, small histogram with all the different public-private funding mixes across different countries that sparked my interest, because, of course, there was a big difference between Ireland and the UK. And they're kind of almost like mirror images, because Ireland is about 70% publicly funded and 30% privately funded. The UK has very quickly gone to being the reverse image of that, with being predominantly privately funded with high student fees, and only a minority, 30% also, of public funding. And so that was because Ireland adopts everything from the UK without thinking, because it's part of imperialism and colonialism.
That may slow down.
Do things.
Well, I think probably is worth approaching these figures with caution, because although that was badged UK, it's very heavily swayed by what's happening in England. And
it's not Scotland.
Sorry,
so yes,
that's a good
point. Lorna,
I was going to fly the
flag. /# not Scotland.
Yes, because obviously we don't have student fees, and our education is funded quite differently.
So in fact, it would be more useful for Ireland to compare itself to Scotland, seeing as we're a unit that's actually more of a similar size.
Celtic French.
But that's not how the imaginary works.
No,
and that's not how the decolonial cringe imaginary works. Higher education is part of a colonial cringe imaginary works.
In fact, how much worse would those statistics be if you did separate out Scotland and looked at just non-Scotland, UK,
just England,
or in fact England,
England alone, and then you would have this teeny tiny public funding.
You would, but and I think your point about the ethical dimension of space is absolutely critical, because of course, you know, looking at in those statistics, we looked at also they cover some of the Nordic universities, and they are, you know, the amount of private expenditure seems to be around about 5%. So much less than Ireland.
And there were other like Central European countries like Austria or Switzerland or Germany that we might, and the Netherlands, but we could easily look to. And there are actually different models. There isn't a single model of higher education. And part of thinking about the ethics of internationalization, as well as what benchmark do you use for internationalizing? And what do you think of as being active management or best practice or management practice? And it did seem to me, reflecting on our experiences and, you know, chaos that we generally are experiencing in higher education reform. How do we respond to all these different pressures because at the moment it's actually in the news even just today that the government hasn't come to a decision about how to fund higher education and is under pressure to go the fees route, because that there isn't any, and it's the government of the day does not want to go down the fees route. Does not, even though we kind of do already have the second highest fees in the EU.
I remember sitting in a meeting at the OECD when before England introduced the fees, the tuition fees, and there was this higher education committee made up of all sorts of OECD member countries being represented, and the sort of deep, sharp intake of breath around the room, around you're doing what? Introducing fees? And because in a sense it did sort of reflect this notion that, you know, higher education is not about being a sort of corporate entity, which is what, in a sense, it could be suggested by fee levels of what, £9,000.
And also the sort of the graduate destinations as well, this idea that a good degree will earn you a high salary, and that correlation is deeply damaging.
Yes, well, the Institute of Fiscal Studies have just been done a whole review, a second review of actually what people can expect when they leave university in terms of their earning power of particular universities and particular courses in particular universities. So it kind of rather undermines that message that some give out, that, you know, you in places you will always get a higher level of income.
What worries me, well, what I kind of also wanted to kind of maybe come in with the other sessions as well, on reflecting on sessions, is that this is a big disconnect between this conversation, which is about policy, reform, funding, and so on, and then the other conversation, which is about learning and education, and the incredible, so Katrina Carlin's thing about the nature spaces, biodiversity, and taking them outside, it was all about the passion for learning and conservation and loving nature, and what that is about. So it seems to be two completely different realities. And it was reflected to me in every reality that I see when I walk through the university every day. There's these different realities of the university that is being developed as a set of rather impressive buildings, and the university as the activities that people do in these buildings, and the relationships that the people have, and people's learning journeys. And there doesn't seem to be a connection between these two. They're kind of like parallel universes of university.
Well, I see the shiny buildings at university being a symptom of people who have money treating universities as status symbols as opposed to places of education. So if you've gone to a model where you defund your universities, you don't spend public money on either salaries or buildings, and you rely on private donors to give you your physical spaces, then you're just leaning into the problem and saying, well, then yes, you know, we are all about the shiny, we are all about the performance and the status, and we're not about these processes. And so I think that that's just a sort of extreme manifestation of the problem that you're identifying is that universities are not being treated within this system as places for education, but as things that signal.
It just seems like that word education has become really thin and brittle.
Yeah.
And, you know, not rich and wonderful, which is what I get from participating in the CELT space and connecting with the OER space and the open educational spaces space, is that people are really interested in education for whatever that is.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'll hopefully be trying to pick up on this afternoon about how we can. One of the things I want to talk about this afternoon is look at some examples of open online learning spaces in the open knowledge landscape, and actually look at some of the ways in which they are open and some of the ways in which they aren't open, and where they lack diversity and where they lack inclusion, and what we can do to try and counteract that, particularly through co-creation and engaging students and staff in the co-creation of their teaching and learning activities. So that's certainly one of the things I want to pick up on this afternoon.
It seems to me there's also sort of confusion about the role. I mean, you're right, to pick up on your point, actually, you're right. There's confusion about the role of what is a university for these days. And we talk about education, but there's a lot of conversation. Well, actually, it's really about perhaps learning, education, which always sounds like something that's done to people than something that people do for themselves, which is more learning. There's a sort of, and you see this reflected in debates about discussion around school education rather than higher education. But also what I think the role of the university must develop in terms of how it contributes to society in its broadest sort of sense. And which clearly raises the question, well, what is that contribution to be? And how do we sort of develop that contribution? Because, and it's all as partly as a sort of context, of course, about universities in London. You know, one of the issues is, well, students really can't afford to live in London anymore. And they some of them, well, then, you know, at least for also, you know, and their families can't afford. So those students who, you know, a lot of students we get are from London, they live with their families, but they also have a full-time, pretty much a full-time job. Excuse me, they're in full-time education and they've got a full-time job. And so there's a sort of whole dimension there about, well, how do we as universities support those people in a way that's actually, because when I went to university, lots of, you know, we were in a completely different context. Most people didn't have any kind of part-time, let alone full-time job at that time. So, you know, it was completely different. But so the game has changed fundamentally. Certainly in places like London, the bigger metropolitan areas where it's expensive to live and you've got to pay all these tuition fees. So, you know, what is it that students come away with having had that experience?
Somebody wants to jump in here.
I've got a question, and this kind of for all of you, because what you're talking about with the spaces is interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way. And lately I've been doing a lot of reading, looking at institutional economics, institutional analysis of higher ed. And I don't know, just if you could comment on how the different aspects of spaces that you're talking about, it seems to me we're changing the space where higher ed belongs in society. We're enclosing it. And I mean, maybe in a longer, broad, you know, if you think a really long historical sweep, higher education going from the guild of learned professors in a space where they're all, you know, just learning and working and researching. And now we're all, it seems like it's all becoming private corporations that are all mission driven or something. I don't know.
I see where you're coming from, Jim, and we were actually talking about this over our lunch. So I think we do have to be careful about not conceptualizing universities as a sort of homogenous group of things, because in different countries there are very, very different traditions of what a university is.
Good point.
And again, if you look at the ancient universities in Scotland and the ancient universities in England, they're very different because Cambridge, Oxford, those universities were originally church universities. In Scotland, the ancient universities, Glasgow and Edinburgh, are civic universities. So they have no association with the church. There are no great chapels in these universities. There are no great churches. These institutions were built in and of the city and for the city. So that civic mission, particularly in Edinburgh, is still very, very strong. There's no campus. The buildings are scattered all over the university. Traditionally, the students of the university live in the city. And there is something called the Edinburgh Settlement, which goes way back, and my senior colleague Melissa Highton talks very, very eloquent about this, about the importance of the Edinburgh Settlement, which is all about putting students from the university to live in quite often quite deprived parts of the city because of this belief that the university has a civic role to play, and that it's about giving something back to the university, but also the students learn from the people who live in the city what it is to be a citizen of that city. So there is this very strong civic mission, which I think is still there underlying the sort of like and you know, okay, we don't have tuition fees in Scotland, but Edinburgh gets a massive amount of money from bequests and from foreign students, but underlying that, there is still this concept of the civic institution.
And I think we, in the States, we have this huge range of institutions, right? We've got Ivy Leagues and all their privilege. We have state universities and some of their relative privilege. We have community colleges, and then we have for-profit institutions. And so I put on Twitter the reference, as I usually do, to Tracy McMillan-Cottom's work on lower ed, right? And this idea that if you buy the argument that education is a commodity, then you have already bought into all of these problematic things that we're talking about, right? And you might easily imagine then the university is a corporation that produces units in that way, and you are less about the civic. But there is this other model that we still have in the States, but that needs defending, about universities as civic institutions that people engage with because we value an educated population. And the root of that is what gives us widening participation in civic society, not just in education, but generally. And so I see the narrowing of that as a piece of the, quite frankly, fascist attempts to limit who gets to participate in the public sphere.
Yes.
And so if widening participation gives us more than just white men in the power structure, and they're threatened by that, then of course they're going to defund public university education. Of course they're going to make it harder for people of color and people who don't have money, and the overlap on that is significant in the US, to go to university, to get themselves into a different place.
Yeah, and I think we've got to be careful not to sort of see fees as the main threat, the main issue, because certainly, you know, we don't have fees in Scotland, but we also are not that good at bringing in a diversity of students from underprivileged backgrounds. So, you know, there are other things in there as well as just the issue of fees, which is, you know, so I think we do have to be careful.
Just when I've been thinking about the landscape of higher education, I worked with a number in network of quite a large network of people who were interested in this question of ethics, and we came up with, you know, kind of this heuristic, which it tries to explain the complex ideas that we have about higher education in terms of overlapping and coexisting imaginaries. So there isn't a single imaginary. Yeah, and in every institution, there's the coexistence of several, often contradictory and conflicting imaginaries. So all of the statements and all of the qualifications are true, but what are we to do with that? And really, the big question has been brought by the expansion of higher education and the fact that now to participate in a civic society, we are looking at this country where over 60%, almost 70% of people are going into higher education of some kind. So it's almost a precondition of civic participation and civic literacy to have third level education. So, and to have exclusionary higher education or an exclusionary imaginary and having to deal with historical background and baggage of actually historically existing exclusions. It is a struggle for every society, which looks different in Scotland as it does in Ireland, as it does in South Africa, as it does in Brazil, as it does in England, and as it in a small rural campus or a medium-sized rural university or a large urban city-based university. So there are different imaginaries, and that question about, which I think Jim was asking, which is about, should we be worrying about enclosure? Is also coexisting with other questions around what is it that we're doing? And something that I took from the session that followed the 2 morning keynotes was around, building citizen literacy, building other students' literacy, making reading and their ability to search for information, their generic skills, and their skills at understanding, getting access to information, understanding it, and all that focus on skills. Then there's a little bit at the back of my mind, which was still in the imaginary of the traditional university, which is, yes, skills, but all the skills that we teach are in the context of quite specialized envelopes. Because we had Helen Dodson, she was talking about histology. And yes, you have generic skills about technology and about literacy and about scientific and so on. But if you're studying very small cells, it's not the same as constructing really large buildings. And it's very specific.
It's okay if I could just jump in there, if we could bring in some of our virtual participants as well, if that's okay. I've been told we've really only got another 5 minutes or so, or less than that, because I know you're back on quite soon on site. Ken Brown, did you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would like to ask, you're talking about the higher education, the universities, and you actually just mentioned there 70% of students in Ireland go to 3rd level. Well, whenever we look at the 3rd level and we look at the binary system that runs in Europe, we've got the research universities and the institutes of technology or the polytechnics and so on. Now, whenever many of these students, not all are high achievers, because in Ireland, the high achievers go to the UCD and the Trinity and the UCC and Galway. That's the top 5–10%. The rest would come to the likes of ourselves. Now, those type of learners have been learning in a structured environment, in a fixed classroom and so on environment. They then move into 3rd level, and now we're talking about these new learning spaces. Now, the transition into 3rd level is very difficult. It's a liminal stage, to say the least, not just moving into adulthood, but changing your education. So how do low to medium achievers embark on a system which completely changes the learning space? How do academics and educators support the students in that initial phase into higher education?
So I did talk about that some this morning, right? And I think that one of the failures that we have in all of the 3rd level, higher, further, whatever you want to call it, the post-high school things, is we make assumptions about what our students are capable of based on where they came from and where they are now. And I think that we collectively need to take responsibility for giving students opportunities to learn what it's like to be where they are now. So rather than simply saying, okay, now you're going to do this kind of learning because we've given you this kind of space, we say, we're going to learn in this way, I'm going to teach you in this way, because the most successful people that I've seen at my institution are the ones who are constantly talking to their students about why they're doing what they're doing. There's no sense at all that they get to make assumptions based on their students' background, because there aren't a lot of commonalities. We have returning students, we have first-gen students, we have students who are parents, we have students who have full-time jobs. We need to be able to be open to all of the different ways that they can hook into it. And we do that by saying, you're in my classroom and this is why I'm teaching you this way. Not, here's who you are and this is what you're capable of. And I think that who you are and what you're capable of happens far too often in all of the different sort of later on stages.
I think there's a parallel conversation in secondary education as well, which kind of leads to your come back to your point too about, well, what are these students, where do these students come from? I mean, they may or may not come from higher secondary schools, which have much more open environments, quite a different way of teaching. I mean, there's a series of assumptions I think we've got to be careful making about actually where they come from. And also there's been a lot of discussion in terms of secondary education about, well, you know, actually it's the students who want to learn in these different ways. So they're actually acting as a bit of a pull on it. It's the teachers who are finding it harder than the students. So maybe some of those students are coming to you know, the higher education institutions with a bit more open-mindedness. But I think you're right. I think the idea that you sort of explaining why we're doing the things that we're doing.
Because there are reasons.
There are
professionals.
And actually they will accept that. I mean, you know, it opens the discussion for them.
Great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who'd like to just jump in and ask a question? Because we really do need to wrap up this up, I'm afraid.
We've got lightning talks to go to.
Yeah, I know. Right, we can certainly continue the conversation off air with our virtual participants, but I think we'll let the on-site people go. It sounds like it's a really fascinating conference and a great day so far, and I look forward to watching your keynote later, Lorna.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
See a lot of familiar faces.
See you. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye.